the day. It is Wednesday. It's the most important day of the week. It's the time that we get the American Association of Rail report. The reason that this is so important, Julie, is that it tells us about the industrial economy. It's the best sort of indicator of how industrial activity is. We got the LMI in. We'll talk about that on my Sonar update. The LMI is an indicator. It's a survey that goes out to hundreds of shippers on how they're feeling about the overall market. So many indicators. Lots of stress in shippers right now.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about the LMI. We'll talk about it in the Sonar update, and then Zach Strickland and Zach Rogers will really dig into it tomorrow on the second half of the show as well.
And Zach Rogers is one of the authors. Mm-hmm. He's with Colorado State University, right? All right. Yes, I believe he's Colorado State. Yeah. I was UC Boulder, Colorado State.
Colorado State, yeah.
So he's with Colorado State, and he will be here to tell us about their data. He's one of the 4 university professors that helped assemble that index. So lots of broader economic activity, and we actually have a real special day because we have the CEO of the American Association of Railroads on today to talk about what their mission is to help ensure the freight economy on the rail side, really advocate for them, but also they publish what I consider one of the most important indicators. We cover it every Wednesday, which is the AAR report. So we'll hear from their CEO. We also have the co-founder and CEO of Forewarn, who's going to dive into this whole topic of the whole legal realm. We do a lot of this stuff. This whole idea of activist attorneys really searching for problems, seeking out liability, seeking out ways to sue companies. He's going to give us an overview of how they're helping defend companies from what I would consider frivolous lawsuits. And then we have Bill Stevens to provide his commentary on the weekly AAR report. And then last but not least, we are bringing in an analyst who is going to talk about Hormuz and really what's happened in the Middle East. I mean, felt like that issue was resolved.
Not anymore.
Flared up over the weekend. So obviously this is, a lot's going on.
Yes. Yeah. I'll be interested to have that conversation, particularly in light of a lot of Trump's announcements last night and this morning. So.
But I think the most important sort of conversation is this bankruptcy. This LTL bankruptcy. Let's hear from the Morning Minute. And then I want to talk about why does private equity have such a poor track record in trucking?
We kick things off on the rails, where Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern have submitted the first batch of critical data demanded by federal regulators. The Surface Transportation Board set a deadline of July 27th for the partners to submit additional information after conditionally accepting their revised merger application back in May. Tuesday's filing addresses the STB's questions regarding control of local railroads Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis and Kansas City Terminal Railway, as well as Freight Car Equipment Cooperative TTX. Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern reiterated that they do not control TRRA and KCT, which handle interchange traffic between Class I carriers, and offered to divest their stakes in order to preserve that neutrality. The railroads remain committed to working with the STB toward a mid-2027 completion of the proposed $85 billion merger, though the start of formal evaluation and environmental review was delayed pending these new submissions. Over in the parcel and logistics sector, DHL Group is riding a massive wave of strong financial momentum. The Germany-based integrated logistics giant just raised its full-year earnings outlook after posting impressive preliminary results for the second quarter, including 10% growth in revenue and a 29% jump in pre-tax income. DHL's 2026 earnings before interest and taxes is now expected to exceed 6.5 billion euros, compared to the previous guidance of 6.2 billion euros. The company attributed this strong performance to positive demand compared to the same 2025 quarter, which was impacted by tariffs and other trade policy shifts, and continued savings from its Fit for Growth efficiency campaign. Particularly striking was DHL Express, which reported earnings of about $1.4 billion, nearly double the income for the prior year period, driven by greater weight per shipment and higher pricing. About $171 million in income benefit came from capacity constraints in the air cargo market, as the Iran war forced Middle East carriers to significantly reduce operations. Finally, another carrier has fallen victim to the brutal operating environment plaguing the freight industry. Less-than-truckload carrier Mountain Valley Express confirmed to FreightWaves on Tuesday that it is no longer operating, with existing accounts and services no longer active as of July 7th. The Manteca, California-based carrier was a small regional player with 13 terminals in California, Arizona, and Nevada, and also offered warehousing and other logistics services. Mountain Valley Express is listed with 277 power units, according to Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration data. The carrier had announced a restructuring, including approximately 105 layoffs in late 2024, and as recently as October had highlighted its aggressive growth goals in a news release.
All right, so lots to talk about, but let's talk about Mountain Valley Express.
Yeah, I mean, this is a California regional carrier. LTL is a tough environment when you're regional, and we're seeing continuation of, the national LTLs and even regional LTLs. It's tough. And there's no tougher region in the country than California, just because of the changing dynamics, the regulations, CARB, fuel prices are extremely high. All of this stuff is very difficult. Now, this was a company that was actually bought by, originally in 2019, acquired by GLS Group, which is a Netherlands-based parcel delivery company, and then later rebranded as GLS US Freight. And then in August 2024, it was bought by DC Logistics, backed by a firm called Bonsai Capital. And interesting, and I was looking up Bonsai Capital, they invest in, on their website, it says non-cyclical businesses. They obviously have now got the memo. It's interesting because I think private equity's track record in asset-based trucking is actually quite poor. I do think private equity is very successful in investing in non-asset. Mm-hmm. But when you invest in asset-based businesses that require trucks, they have a very poor track record.
Why do you think that is? And I do think you're right that brokerage, it's much about technology and processes and all of that, and people. The asset-based world is different. Why do you think that track record is poor?
Because you have assets, and these assets have to be turned over. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of private equity firms make is they buy these assets, they buy these businesses that are at the top of the market. Now, 2024 wasn't that. They may not understand what they're buying. They may not understand that this is a cyclical, brutal business with the fact that, when the market's good, it's going to turn over. And when the market's bad, it's going to recover. And so they should be buying at the bottom of the market, which would be, last year. And perhaps they did. You could argue that in 2024 was the bottom of the market, but the market did not improve up until, and I think what happens is, we've talked about this, is balance sheets have memory. And so I think private equity just doesn't know what they're buying. These are operational intensive businesses. You have equipment that has to be replaced.
Capital-intensive business.
Very capital-intensive. You have a very low return on assets. You also have humans that drivers, and you've got issues with what's been going on and just availability of truck drivers around the country. And with all of the different regulatory pressures moving drivers out, it makes it harder. It's a brittle business that isn't for tourists.
Do you think it's a focus on growth over profitability, and you can't always grow in a cyclical market? I
think private equity would love to find growing businesses, but a lot of private equity firms are comfortable buying into businesses that are not growing sectors, and they can buy them and financial engineer them. I think the problem in trucking is when the market is good, then you can't find drivers because drivers become far more expensive. When the market is bad, you really can't cut your cost quick enough because you still have to have these assets out there. Particularly LTL. LTL is probably the hardest because of the fixed infrastructure that you have to have, and therefore...
and it sees the biggest swings.
It does see big swings, and it has been struggling in this recovery. We know that from the cash shipment index, that LTL is a laggard to truckload, and therefore you can see it because CAS's shipment index has far more LTL than it has truckload, and therefore it's slower to respond to the cycle. And typically, as you see a recovery, truckload recovers first before LTL. We're starting to see LTL recover, particularly in the industrial sector. But I think there's just a lot of headwinds, and I don't think this is a place for tourists. That rarely do you have executives that come from outside the industry that can operate an asset-based trucking business and successful. You know this painfully well. You're not an outsider, you're an insider, but you know how painful this industry can be for outsiders. Even if you have logistics experience, like if you're from the logistics industry and 3PL industry, trying to move into asset-based trucking, it's just not for the faint of heart.
Agreed. Yep.
It is a brutal, unforgiving market. Speaking of brutal, unforgiving, we're going to talk about the legal world, and we have the right guest to do that. We have Todd. He is the co-founder and CEO of FreightWaves. Todd, tell us about FreightWaves. What do you guys do?
Yeah. Hey, Craig, Julie, it's great to be with you this morning. And of course, naturally a fan of the show. When we look at the claim activity that this industry has faced over the last, decade or more now, a lot of that we assume is happening on the road. And, increasingly this is starting online. Every transportation accident really creates two accidents and two events from our perspective. The first is usually a physical event on the road. And the second, not surprisingly, is the digital event that begins almost immediately afterward. So if you think about, in your personal world, if a tree falls on your house, you may not have the claims department phone number readily available for the insurance company on your phone. So you turn to search. And so very similarly, if someone is injured in a trucking accident, a vehicle is damaged, cargo gets lost, or a family member is looking, to try to figure out next steps, increasingly the first thing they do is reach for their phone. They may turn to a search engine like Google or go to ChatGPT and put a question in like, what should I do? And they may click on an advertisement or they may visit a website, but more and more, transportation companies are, we're seeing that they're seeing this physical event, but they often don't see that digital secondary event. So that secondary digital event is what FreightWaves, the problem that we're addressing and built to address.
So how do you guys address that? What's the process for helping companies navigate this problem?
Yeah. So if you think about, the first few minutes after an accident, usually people are screaming for answers. And, typically someone may be injured, they may be frightened. And so they're asking questions like, what should I do after a truck accident? Do I need an attorney? Who pays a medical bill? Is the claim worth it? And so, very quickly, the trucking company is looking at this risk that's developing far downstream. They're seeing that claim happen later than actually trying to respond to it early on. So from that, we are sifting through millions and billions of data signals across digital platforms to try to unlock and uncover and connect who are some of these actors that are participating in some of these schemes. So many of your truckers are very familiar with driving through cities and seeing those billboards and the attorney advertising. And what we say is that while that may exist when you're driving through a city, what's happening online is much more nefarious and much more at risk for organizations.
And so, Todd, when you say nefarious, I mean, there's legitimate, lawsuits where you have an accident that someone is injured and they have a legitimate claim. We've been talking about a lot of the regulatory changes that have been happening, particularly with freight brokers now are exposed where they weren't before. What is exactly, when you say nefariousness, what are you referring to?
Yeah, what we're finding is that more and more now with the advent of AI, we're seeing spoofed websites, doppelganger sites for both law firms, trucking companies, even insurance companies. And this becomes kind of the new intake for people who are searching. They may land on the wrong website. And so as they start to fill out information, they may have their information harvested and fished and then resold into the dark web, right? But what we're also finding is coordinated activity between organized crime groups, as well as some of the very firms that we think are representing our interests from a legal standpoint. And so as a result, FreightWaves has worked with the groups like National Insurance Crime Bureau, FBI, other federal agencies and intelligence agencies, because this activity spans not just here in the U.S., but internationally through foreign and nation-state sponsored activity. And so we're connecting these dots where they're using the very digital tools that we think of as promoting our brand and promoting our companies. They're being turned against us to target and use these tools to find folks online.
So Todd, what is it? Fill out a form. You've got you said organized crime, a criminal syndicate. If I fill out a form and talk about this accident, a lot of this stuff is public record anyways. What are they gaining? Like, I'm still not connecting the gain in terms of fill out the form. What exactly are they getting out of this?
Well, if you imagine going down an intake funnel, like a lead form or a claim form, you're submitting information about your claim, about your own personal information. And as you start moving through that claim, they may begin asking more and more personal information. And so that information becomes harvested and then potentially resold into the dark web. And so personal information that's identifiable to you or to your business gets reused. But what we're also seeing at a broader level, Craig, is that attorney advertising has just absolutely increased everywhere, right? You can't, of course, drive around the country without seeing these billboards. But at the same time, we just ran a study recently where we analyzed 56 law firms that spent $250 million, almost $228 million on paid search advertising, and it's targeting transportation businesses. And just to put that into deeper perspective, in some markets, they were paying nearly $1,000 for a single trucking-related advertising click. So if you think about that for a moment, it's not just that it's $1,000 to a signed case. It's just the opportunity to get traffic from that advertisement to a website. And it tells you firsthand how important that first digital interaction has become, because these law firms and other groups as well have recognized that there is a business model behind it, and they can recoup that cost many times over very quickly. And so it's creating, if you will, a manufactured artificial engine to create more and more and harvest more and more lawsuits against organizations, particularly transportation companies.
So if you're a carrier and you are involved in an accident, is it even possible to get to the other parties involved before these attorneys or these search engines have contacted them? Is it possible to get ahead of it anymore?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of Forewarn. It's really to understand, the digital landscape of how your brand is being used or misused, the marks, the logos, the fake websites. It's about getting ahead of it upstream before it becomes a legal nightmare or become fraud. All right. And so understanding at volume how this is playing out across the United States is really the heart of what we're doing at Forewarn, is really surfacing and scaling the surveillance at a global level around how your brand, if you think about even just a search, and we often say this to transportation companies as well, do a search from your headquarters. You're going to see one set of results and rankings about, your company. If you do that 3 or 4 zip codes down the street, we may see a totally different set of answers. And that science is very sophisticated. And the actors, the bad actors in particular, are figuring out how to optimize that and drive even more claimant activity and also lawsuits. So it's really about going upstream to identify where these patterns are emerging from, what geographies. We have some trucking companies who are using this intelligence to reroute inexperienced drivers through zip codes and areas that are highly litigious, putting more experienced drivers through that. They're recalibrating what their kind of operating costs are as a result of some of this data. And so increasingly, this activity is certainly exacerbated with the use of AI, because we're seeing more and more content being emanated from this, and also fake content, synthetic content as well.
I actually heard that same thing from COO of a large trucking company, that certain counties, because the litigation is so tough, that they completely route around them at this point and don't go through them.
I think places in Texas or in Georgia, South Georgia, there are counties that you do not want to end up in a lawsuit, because the juries and the court system, the judges are so partial against trucking companies that these, there are counties where you want nothing to do with in the United States.
Todd, for the viewers still trying to wrap their head around this, can you give maybe a concrete example of one of these schemes that has played out, and then how your product could have helped prevent that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question, because, this is a very complex problem. In the old days, we would do a search and we get all those blue links at the bottom and, assume that they're safe to click on. And now those blue links that, we use to get answers on our search can be can be poisoned, right? Can be exploited. So, but to give you a real concrete example, down in the South not too long ago was Operation Sideswipe. I don't know if you're both familiar with this, but this was a situation.
We covered it. We actually covered this active before it became I believe the Atlantic did a big expose on it, but we were actually very early on that story before anyone else was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an incredible story. And so part of the activity around that, we see different pockets of activity like that around the country. And I use that as an example because oftentimes you're seeing cars slamming into trucking companies. At the same time, we're also seeing where the law firms that are involved in representing these cases, sometimes they're connected right to the very criminal group that's responsible. In other cases, we see advertising around, folks for hire to participate in activity around this. So what we're saying is that a lot of this activity, before it becomes kind of a concrete set of activities, whether it happens in the streets or not, we're seeing it happening digitally. And we're seeing the recruiting of people. We're seeing the recruitment of activity for different geographies. The bidding of keywords, for example, post-accident, we'll see activity following that, as we were mentioning before. To give you a sense right now, the going search rate for a trucking accident attorney across the United States will vary by city. But I'm surprised. I bet you wouldn't be surprised to know that nearly $1,000 per click in Santa Ana is one of the highest regions right now for a truck accident attorney. So knowing where these risks are unfolding, where these rates, the demand for this gives us a sense too of where risk is forming, where accidents are forming, or where there's potentially additional loss coming. And so we can use this to better navigate risk around the corner.
Yeah, for those that aren't familiar with what you were talking about, Operation Sideswipe, is essentially there was this stretch of road in Louisiana, about 10 miles, that had a rash of accidents and insurance claims. And it was an inside job. They were intentionally getting in trucking accidents to base it. It was all a setup. Actually, I believe legal counsel was invested in it as well, was a part of it. But it was all organized crime. And the insurance companies kept noticing that this was statistically impossible. It was like 1 out of a trillion chance that this was just random happenstance that this was happening.
Right. And that's that's the tricky part, is connecting those dots of where you begin to see that frequency not only happen in, say, one stretch of land, but that then you have repeat actors, frequent filers, as we call them. And so we had a situation recently up in the Northeast where a claimant had a very high-end truck, was involved in an accident. They also had been involved with an auto body shop and a medical office. And between the three of those organized groups, they went across the country to nearly a dozen different cities and targeted a particular insurance company to the tune of about $29 million. And so they were repeating that pattern, that setup across the country. And so at Forewarn, we can see those patterns and connect the dots over a period of time. We can say that this is a group that's repeating their activity over and over again. Let's flag that. Let's investigate this.
So, Todd, it's interesting. A friend of mine was in an accident. This was a couple of years ago in the state of Texas, and she was injured. She ended up, there was an ambulance that came, and what I noticed is it was on Facebook, and the article popped up. When I Googled to get more information to find out how she was doing, I noticed that there was about a dozen law firms that had written an article so that they would show up top of search when you just searched her name. And this was someone who didn't have a big social media presence, but who sort of kept a quiet profile. But and this was 10 years ago. I imagine this has evolved, but it was kind of surprising to see law firms take the initiative to write news articles related to this accident. And it was not just one; it was like a dozen. I guess this accident was quite substantial.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Craig, we monitor close to 21,000 what we call opportunists across the ecosystem. And so these can be certainly law firms, they can be adjusters, contractors, auto body shops, you name it. But what we do, and when you mentioned that comment about the advertising that's taking place. It has become so much more sophisticated, and there's a lot of dollars behind it as well. So when you talk about attorney advertising or plaintiff advertising, there's also hedge funds and other groups, PE groups and others that are backing some of this for a chance for a piece of the settlement. And so this is a much bigger game, if you will, in terms of the connected dots and the relationships between these organizations and what they're targeting. No longer is this kind of like the Aaron Brockovich moment of a small plaintiff taking on a big company. This is a very different tune, to the tune of driving money and investment dollars back. So this is why this risk is, very present in the transportation industry. I think we all face it. We see it in our own personal lives as well with our own personal insurance, but it's now translated into the transportation industry.
Yeah, litigation finance is a plague on society because it just encourages it's exploitive, and essentially the plaintiffs' attorneys are the ones that win. We're not fans of plaintiffs' attorneys here at FreightWaves Today. We did have a plaintiff's attorney on last week. It was fun watching Max and the plaintiff's attorney, my father, who is CEO and founder of US Express, go at it because two people who did not want to be in the same room and typically wouldn't want to be in the same room, usually for not great circumstances. But I think it's, it highlights an issue. And with Montgomery, we had, the freight brokers now are dealing with a whole new level of liability. Have you seen an interest or an increase in freight brokerages, third-party logistics companies reach out, or is it still very early for them? Are they still digesting the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they are still trying to digest, but we've already had freight brokers reach out. We've even had reinsurers reach out to us as well to kind of measure this risk nationally for different organizations. Captives certainly are looking at this internally to say, okay, how do we now recalibrate our approach to this new type of risk and factor this into our models? Because look, as we know, one thing, technology never stops. It keeps increasing. And so this new technology with AI is expanding the attack surface. It's changing the way we look at fraud. In the old days, and when we think of traditional things like cyber, we think of it as kind of internal, that someone is attacking our systems behind the firewall, stealing information, stealing data, compromising a username or a password. What we're talking about here is external, and this is about the attack surface. How do you use the brands of our transportation companies? How do you use the names? How do you create content that can redirect consumers and others to these kind of intake sites? And so, Julie, you mentioned a really good point earlier about the amount of information being created from these sites and so on. We had a company that was targeted. This is an insurance company that was targeted with over 300 blog articles specifically written about them, and of course using AI every day for nearly 3 months. And so this is clearly exploiting, it's misrepresenting, but what they're doing is actually manipulating the search engines to re-rank search, to use that content to spread a false narrative. And what most people don't realize is that when one large language model becomes corrupted, many times the others do too, because they inherently look at the other large language models, the other AIs, right, and inherit that information as part of a truth that they then provide as an answer back to the consumer asking the question, what should I do in the case of a truck accident with XYZ company? And so that's where the attack surface has changed. It's external.
So what can transportation companies, carriers, brokers do? What should they be doing now? What can they be doing to protect their, to your point, brand, image, search results today? And then the second part of this is, how does Forewarn help carriers see any risks surrounding this and prevent it?
Yeah. Great question, Julie. Well, the first thing, certainly is, most transportation companies can see the accident, they can see the claim, they can see the lawsuit. What they can't see is the digital activity that's helping shape how that got started and what happens in between. And so step one is understanding the problem, and understanding the problem about their brand, about making sure that they say who they are, what they represent, their narrative is taking place across the internet. And so how that gets shaped, how that gets morphed, how that gets, exploited is where really FOREWARN comes in helping to identify, but also how it gets used in a misrepresentative way. And so, from our standpoint at FOREWARN, everything we do is from the outside in. And I think one of the most unique plays about FOREWARN is that we can do this type of intelligence completely externally. We are scanning literally trillions of data points and data signals around search activity, search behavior, advertising, marketing platforms. And it builds a picture of behavior that allows us to use it as an investigative tool, but also to provide as a warning to our companies that use us to protect their business, to help them build a better digital moat around the business.
So Todd, is this a subscription-based product, or how do you guys make money?
Yeah, it is. It's a subscription-based product. We offer this. We provide intelligence reports very similar. If you're in an intelligence agency, we're providing content and direction around the magnitude, the size, the scale. If there's third-party litigation funding involved, who are those actors? Are they actors happening here in the U.S. or domestic or internationally? Are there foreign interests at scale that compromise not only the business, but potentially national security issues? So we are comprising that information in reporting. We also provide a digital interface as well for accessing information and downloading data directly for risk analysis.
Now, I imagine this is helpful in the event of if you do have a legitimate claim filed against you, you had an accident. It's helpful to understand who the counterparties are that are involved so that you can assess what risk, how contentious this lawsuit's going to be, how opportunistic the counterparties are, because then you kind of know what you're dealing with. The worst part in a lawsuit is to not know what the other party wants.
Yeah, and not knowing with the other who the other party is truly connected to as well. For example, right now we're involved in several RICO cases and helping to provide evidentiary information. And in those particular cases, we uncovered other actors that would completely have been hidden, through discovery and through some of the actions that we had seen up to that point. So we were called in to provide deeper surveillance and analysis, and in the process uncovered a whole different set of other organized groups as part of this. So it's about getting the full picture and knowing what you're up against. And look, you're right. There's a absolute value and purpose for plaintiff firms to exist in this country because there are legitimate cases that need to be tried and heard. We're just talking about that small percent of cases that can sometimes span turn a case into a 25, 100, or multi-$100 million lawsuit that becomes frivolous. And as you mentioned, the act of putting money into this to exacerbate it further through third-party litigation funding has a real thorn in our side as well. And it creates a manufactured situation that already is at a high risk.
Yeah, Todd, thank you. We could ask so many more questions. This is truly fascinating and something I hadn't really thought about before, so eye-opening as well. So really appreciate you being on today and your time to talk about it. We are going to take a quick break and come back with our Sonar update.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesse Love are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara driving coach.
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
What's the masterclass all about? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're a driver, you're an owner-operator, you're a fleet owner, whether you're in compliance services, dispatcher, no matter what it is, Masterclass is for you. Every 2 weeks, you're gonna sit down with me and we're gonna go over certain business topics that are related specifically to your small trucking company operations. We're gonna help you with everything from compliance to how to negotiate better on the spot board, how to find direct freight, and everything in between. This is the reason why you don't wanna miss out on Masterclass. It's about an hour to an hour and a half, and then on top of that, you'll have the library to you so that way you can always research and reflect back onto it. Don't miss out this opportunity. This is built specifically for you. I'm excited and I hope to see you in class.
Imagine a world where your freight moves as fast as a digital pulse. What if your visibility didn't just tell you where a truck was, but exactly where it needed to be 48 hours from now? Think of a logistics network that corrects its own mistakes before they cost you a single dime. What if your supply chain could think for itself? Imagine AI agents negotiating rates in milliseconds, predictive models that solve labor shortages before they even happen. This isn't science fiction, it's the agenda. On July 15th at the historic Old Post Office in Chicago, FreightWaves presents the Supply Chain AI Symposium. We are defining in real time how AI is embedded into every mile, every warehouse, and every handshake. Because in 2026, the future isn't just coming, it's already negotiating. The FreightWaves Supply Chain AI Symposium. Secure your spot now.
Welcome back. Earlier today, Craig dove into the sonar data and gave us a pretty good update of what's happening with the LMI. Let's take a look.
Logistics Managers Index, also called the LMI, is out. This is the once-a-month survey of shippers in terms of how they're feeling about a number of indicators. And the LMI breaks down different factors in terms of major supply chain data points and asks shippers about what their expectations are in terms of these overall market conditions. The LMI gives us a lot of sentiment on how shippers are feeling about things. I love the LMI. It tells us a lot about what we can expect from the freight market because it's interviewing people that are on the front lines, typically of large shippers. It's assembled by 4 universities. So it's coming together and asking shippers exactly what they think about the freight market and frankly, inventory levels, warehouse capacity, things like that. And it gives us a really nice indicator of what's likely to happen. And it tracks really closely to Sonar's overall data. Plus, all of the LMI data points are actually in Sonar. So you can go to Sonar and get these. You can also go to the report and get them. One of the nice things is to compare the LMI data to the overall freight market data that we have in Sonar, and you can see a lot of similarities. But what I think is really interesting about this particular LMI is that we broke above 70, which is a really strong number. We haven't been that high since 2022. And really, when you look at the report, this tells us just how robust this overall freight market is, and frankly, how much shippers are struggling right now to get transportation capacity, how much higher transportation rates are, and frankly, how they feel about things going forward. This is very clear. Reality has set in on the shipper community. They are fully aware of just how tight this market is and how tight this market is likely to stay. There's no doubt about it that they can see the pressure that's in the freight market and see the pressure that's in the overall supply chain. They cannot get their hands on transportation capacity. That is absolutely clear in the data. And when you look at the individual data points, we see that transportation capacity is one of those individual elements where they just can't secure it. It's near record lows as we track this data. Let's break down this overall report because I think it's really interesting. So let's start with inventory levels because this is one of the most important indicators in the freight market. So inventory levels tell us a lot about how companies are responding to the market. It also tells us when there's a pretty dramatic change in inventory levels that something is shifting in overall inventory planning, inventory procurement, just consumer demand and consumer sentiment. We get a lot of information on inventory levels. And anytime you see inventory levels that are very low, the anticipation is that inventory levels will build, and this will drive a lot of freight demand. As inventory levels are building, continues to drive freight demand, but at some point they peak, and that's when we start to see a drop-off in overall freight demand. One of the interesting things is that the report this month sort of flipped the script, if you will. Earlier this year, we saw companies keeping inventories very light. They were very cautious to build inventories, particularly what they call downstream, which are retail activities. So the report breaks up upstream, which is manufacturing, overall importers really on the supply chain side, their manufacturing, production, and then downstream is retail, largely related to consumer activity. And what we see in the downstream versus upstream is actually really telling, because it tells us that retailers are starting to build more inventory. And you may read into that and say, well, maybe retailers are a little, are starting to see slower retail sales. That's not what the retail sales data tells us, but it does tell us that retailers are incredibly cautious about the overall state of tariffs, and that's why they're building. They're very concerned about new tariffs coming into effect and really punishing them with higher tariffs and causing supply chain disruptions. And so they're building inventories. The other thing you can draw from this is that the inventory build for retailers is likely a factor that they've gained confidence in consumer activity and consumer sentiment. We saw the consumer survey data really bounce back from some record low consumer surveys. The University of Michigan consumer survey has bounced back a bit. And this is something you can see in the data, is the retailers have more confidence now in the fact that consumers are going to continue to spend, that there hasn't been a slowdown. I think they were playing it cautious last year. That's no longer the case. We see inventory levels in terms of downstream activity to a 73.3. Upstream is at a 60.3. The important thing to know is there is a delta between those 2 points. It tells us that retailers have more inventory. This is good from a supply chain standpoint because it means that stuff is sitting in sitting in warehouses and distribution centers ready to be consumed. And if you're in trucking, that means that stuff has to be trucked. Upstream, we're at 60.3. I think what's really interesting about the upstream data point is that manufacturers are still cautious compared to retailers, is that manufacturers are playing it safe, not building too much inventory because they want to, they don't want to hold on to this inventory because of concerns. Of course, manufacturers have been, they're seeing a lot of demand come into the market. We can see this in the ISM data. You can start to see LTL move, and LTL is a nice reflection of industrial activity. And that is really what we're also seeing in the rail data, which is something we report every single Wednesday. The American Association of Railroad is really telling us that manufacturers' demand is increasing. And this is one of the reasons that you're not seeing an inventory build substantially, is because demand is continuing to increase. Inventory costs are high. Warehouse utilization is really robust. They're trying to utilize every bit of warehouse they can get their hands on and expect to use more of it. Interesting enough, downstream, which is again a reflection of retail activity, is higher. When we look at the most stressed part of the entire data point and data set is all related to transportation. Anyone that watches the show knows just how strong relative to what the freight market has been, just how strong the freight market is. And you can see this in the data. Downstream, which is really reflected in retail activity, downstream is at a 90 in terms of transportation price, just how strong, how much more increase the retailers are expecting transportation cost. Interesting enough, upstream, again, manufacturers are at 83.3, but are not seeing as much pressure on transportation capacity as what the downstream providers are. Now, this is probably related to the fact that downstream tends to rely upon the overall for-hire trucking market more so than what the upstream providers do. So manufacturers do rely upon a lot of rail capacity. They do rely upon truck capacity. But really, when you look downstream, that's the for-hire trucking market and just how tight things are. And they start planning their peak season 6 to 9 months out. And we've talked about it frequently, is that the large asset carriers are wanting significant rate increases. They're running out of capacity, and it's putting a lot of pressure on the overall freight market. And frankly, if you're a retailer, you're thinking about the peak season, you're thinking about how much pressure is going to exist. And how much pressure is really on you. So bottom line, this LMI is telling us stuff that we already know, that transportation capacity is tight, transportation prices are continue to increase. Inventories are something to watch. Again, sentiment is that retailers are feeling bullish about consumer activity, but it is something to watch. One of the nice things is I like to see higher inventory levels on retail than I do in manufacturing, because manufacturing just basically, in order to produce things, you need to build up your inventory levels so that you can get those products assembled and out the door. And the fact that there are still tight inventory levels upstream is telling us that demand is actually continues to increase. And of course, every data point that we look at, whether it's trucking or rail, is reinforcing that fact.
All right, Craig, so it might be weird how much I like the LMI. Like, I actually look forward to it.
I don't think it's weird. You're a nerd. You're a freight nerd, like me. We love freight data. You work at the largest freight data company in the world. I hope you like the LMI.
Yeah, and I love it in Sonar. I think we've got the graphic of how you can get that really good overview in our executive dashboard. And I like that because it gives you a full overview, right? Like, transportation pricing, capacity, warehouse capacity, inventory levels. It really gives you a full view beyond just like what's happening in freight rates. And so you can anticipate what's coming. And that's what I love about it.
Do you like the LMI more than the AAR weekly report? Be honest.
I do.
Okay.
But
well, that's okay.
But maybe that's because it just comes out once a month, so I like anticipate it more versus AR every week. I don't know.
I like the AR. It's a weekly thing. I need the high cadence. I need a dopamine hit. And I need to know how these industrials are doing. And we will know all about it. We have Bill Stevens to give us the rundown. With a special treat as well as CEO of the AAR is going to tell us about what he is seeing and they're expecting for the rest of the year. Coming up.
It's National Safety Month, which makes this a great time to ask how your fleet can prevent more accidents. Samsara AI detects risks in real time, giving teams more visibility into what's happening on the road and more context to coach drivers before risky moments become incidents. Fleets using Samsara Complete AI Safety Solution have reduced crash rates by nearly 75%. See the data behind the results in the Samsara Safety Report at samsara.com/FreightWaves.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesse Love are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara Driving Coach.
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
The super successful people are part of the 1%. They're part of that very, very small percentage. That's why I don't want you to do things that everybody's doing. I want you to do the small things that nobody else is doing. The people that are most successful in this business treat it like it's the only thing that's bringing income into their household. If you do that, then you'll have the same results. These people operate like they have no other chance. They have nothing else going. This is the only breadwinner that they have in play. I'm Adam Wingfield, and this is the FreightWaves Playbook. Become part of the 1%. Sign up for FreightWaves Playbook today.
Well, it's my favorite day of the week. It's my favorite time of the week. It's Bill Stevens' report on the AAR report. Bill, Julie and I were talking, you need a walkout song. We need an opening. I'm thinking, I don't know what kind of music you listen to, but maybe some banjos playing with some nice train, going across the screen. What do you think?
Something acoustic, something bluegrassy. Yeah, that would.
It feels very train-esque, right?
It's got to have some energy to it, though.
It's got to have some high energy. But, train, like, Devil Went Down to Georgia. I don't think we can't play that because we can't license it, but we can play something like that. A little bit of fiddle, making it hot.
We can work on that. So, Craig, this is not just a typical Wednesday for the AAR because we have month end for June and second quarter data in addition to the weekly report. So we'll look at the weekly numbers first, and then go further back and take a look at what AAR is seeing. First, in North American traffic in the week ending July 4th, carload was up 6.3%. Intermodal was up 10.3% for North America, which gave us a total of an increase of 8.4%. That is above the average of the last 4 weeks, which has been 5.5%. So things are definitely moving in the right direction here. It's still a story of the U.S. being much stronger than Canada on intermodal. This week, Canadian carload volume was higher than in the U.S., but the U.S. is the story here. Carloads for this week were up 3.4%. Compared to 2% for the last 4 weeks. U.S. intermodal volume up 12.9% compared to 11.7% for the last 4. So that gives us a total U.S. Originated traffic volume of 8.6% compared to 7.2% for the last 4 weeks. Of note, and we discussed this over the last couple of weeks, lumber and wood products up double digits again, 35% this week. And that's compared to 12.1% over the last 4 and just 5% for the year. Ores and metals, again, strong showing, ore up 10%, key ingredient in steel. Scrap, steel and iron, also a key ingredient in steel, up almost 18%. And then if we back out and we look at June, it was a monthly record, the AAR says, for weekly average intermodal volume. Average weekly carloads were the highest since May of 2021. And these were broad-based gains. This wasn't just 1 or 2 commodities. 14 out of the 20 commodity groups that the AAR tracks posted gains in June. And if you zoom out a little bit further and go to the second quarter data for the U.S., carloads were up 2.3%. But if you take coal out of that equation, it was actually up 4.5%. So a whole lot stronger when coal, one of the biggest carload commodity groups, and which has been in long-term decline, is taken out of the picture. In intermodal for the second quarter, up 6.7%. And carloads are at their highest level since August of 2018 when you exclude coal, and 16 of 20 commodities are up. It's the broadest advance since the post-pandemic recovery. And then the AAR publishes monthly a freight rail index, which it's seasonally adjusted in U.S. intermodal originations plus carloads, but they exclude coal and grain. So this is the more economically sensitive commodities that railroads haul. And the freight rail index is at its second highest level on record. Second highest level on record. So things are definitely moving in the right direction there as well. And the AAR notes that chemicals have had 6 straight months of increases and a record first half of 2026. And steel at the highest level in nearly 5 years. And iron and steel scrap, which electric arc furnaces use to turn into new steel, that is the highest level in 15 years. Coal, again, has been a drag. That's really the biggest commodity that's down, and you can see that bar at the bottom of that chart. And then autos and construction and related commodities, they've been uneven. But overall, it's been a very broad-based and strong first half of the year for U.S. rail traffic, which should set us up well for the second half of the year.
Well, that's Bill, some amazing numbers there. I've said our audience is not bullish enough, and that continues to play out, is that these numbers are astounding. I mean, the interesting thing is when I post this on X, I talk about the fact that, for the last couple of months, we've been a couple of percent increase, 2 to 3% increase in volume. People are like, that's just 2%. I'm like, you guys are stuck in AI land, where in public equities, where you're looking at 10, 20, 30% growth. When you look at rail volume growth, I'm talking specifically in the bulk commodities, to get 4.5% when you take out coal and strip out coal and grains, that is incredibly bullish. Like, that is the U.S. economy that's absolutely humming, and it's telling us a lot about what we're likely to see and continue to see in the industrial sector.
Absolutely, and it does show strength in the industrial sector, as you mentioned in the LMI segment just before I came on, and it does seem to be very broad based. When you see the raw materials that go into the products that we end up buying, or that are used elsewhere, like in construction or in data centers, you name it. When you see those raw materials rising, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to turn into finished goods that all of us use, so there will be more freight to move.
Yeah, what I love about this is, for the trucking audience, is that the stuff is going into factories, as you mentioned, Bill. It's getting assembled. It's raw materials that go in there. It's the inputs. And what we get when we talk about coke and recycled metals is you end up getting finished goods that come out of it, or stuff that goes into construction materials for big data centers, or perhaps goes into cars or even airplanes. And so what I think is happening is the industrial sector is absolutely moving. I think one of the interesting data points was your comment about the last time that we saw this level of activity was 2021. That was the sort of peak of COVID. That was when the freight market really reached, it's the second highest report, I believe you said, for the month of June since 2021. Just a sign of just how robust this economy is.
Yeah, and that post-COVID snapback was really huge. And you remember that eventually led to congestion and all sorts of problems. Fortunately, the railroad's in relatively good shape this time. We don't have all the dislocation in the labor markets like we did after the pandemic. So things are going much more smoothly than they did then. But yeah, I mean, it just really shows a broad-based recovery for the most part. And you're generally never going to get the economy firing on all cylinders. So to have 16 out of 20 commodities moving up, good sign.
I think one of my favorite parts about this is, if you go back during COVID and we had these huge surges in freight volume, a lot of that was government stimulus, where really just threw a lot of kerosene on the fire, and that was what was driving sort of all this volume. Now we have the private sector picking up, and yes, AI data centers are part of it. The defense spending, military, industrial replenishment of weapons is certainly a part of it. But what I like about the fact that we're seeing in the economy right now on the industrial side is a lot of it's private sector. Even AI data centers, that's private sector. It's building out power plants. It's building out transmission lines. It's building out pipelines. That's happening because there's demand. And look, you have the most successful, largest companies in the history of mankind putting capital into the economy. What isn't liked about that? Like, you're just not bullish enough, Julie.
Yeah, no, I gotta say, before you told me I wasn't bullish enough, I was going to say,
bullish enough.
I was going to say,
tells us
look,
that.
I was sort of getting used to, this being sort of the new normal, tender rejections just staying at 17%. I was feeling a little bit like, all right, what's going to happen? After this, I am even more bullish than I was, and I'm excited about what I think this means for the longevity of the freight market too. This isn't that it's going to be a pop right now. As mentioned, this is stuff that's going into manufacturing facilities. It's going to continue to create more goods. Consumer confidence is going to continue to get stronger. It's going to continue to push further and further downstream from here. So I'm more excited about the longevity.
The nice thing about looking at the rail, and I look at the bulk data, the intermodal data is interesting, Bill. We talked about how robust it is. Intermodal, the railroads consider it very important. We obviously look at it every single day, our high frequency intermodal data. No surprises there. from our standpoint because we've been watching just the robustness of intermodal activity happen across our data sets. But I think what's really interesting about the bulk data is it tells us a little bit more nuance in the freight market, because it's, one of the big backstories that we hear in these public reports around trucking is the fact that this is not a demand-driven recovery. It's a capacity-driven recovery. The rail data actually challenges that thesis. At least right now, it's telling us that there is demand poured into the economy that isn't related. I mean, a lot of the commodities that we're talking, these big bulk rail commodities, do not move over long distances on trucking. Like it's a non-fungible commodity. Trucking is not competing to take a bulk freight off on long distances. Therefore, that's why it's such an important indicator of the overall demand that we're likely to see in trucking in coming months.
Right, and to your point too about an industrial renaissance, John Brooks, who's the chief marketing officer at Canadian Pacific Kansas City, he said at an investor conference last month that ongoing trade uncertainty in North America has frozen some investments. Companies eyeing plant expansions or new plants, either in the U.S. or in Mexico, they're kind of holding tight for right now until there's more clarity on what happens with the North American trade agreement. And then the other thing is there's a slight asterisk on intermodal volume. When you see them up double digits, and it's been, a really hot June in terms of intermodal volume. Intermodal analyst Larry Gross points out that there's the year-over-year easy comparison issue going on here because of the rush of the front loading of goods last year to avoid tariffs, particularly the China tariffs. And so the numbers today are being compared to the big intermodal lull that occurred at this time last year. That said, the way Larry looked at it, he said the increase is probably more like 5% rather than the 10% that we're seeing. But 5%, we'll take it, especially after the traffic trends for the past 3-4 years, right?
I mean, intermodal really didn't see the freight recession. I mean, it was viewed. In fact, I remember I was visiting with a very large intermodal provider that actually said shippers are asking for them to slow down. Normally in freight markets, when they're operating healthily, people want their stuff as fast as they can get it. It's cheap, but also fast. Last couple of years, they're like, slow it down. We don't want this stuff in our warehouses. We don't want it in inventory. We don't want it on our books, and we can show it in transit. And so it was interesting that there was this weird world where freight was asked to slow down. I suspect that that's not the case. I suspect a lot of shippers are taking advantage of the fuel surcharge that you see in intermodal, and this is more retained volume. Once, we've talked about this, Julie, once shippers experience intermodal and they reposition their supply chains to allow for it and benefit from it, they tend to stay. It's really that discovery process because you have to retool your supply chain a bit and your freight routing a bit. It takes a little bit of work, but once you've done it, it's hard to go back if you can experience the same service.
Yeah, and there is some marginal traffic. People. One of the selling points of intermodal is almost guaranteed capacity. If you're a big customer and you book your capacity out and you have that long-term contract in place, but then you do have some marginal traffic that flows back and forth to the highway. That's one reason why the trailer figures are really robust. They're up about 20% this week. The railroads really don't like to handle trailers very much.
TUFC, that was U.S. Express's. They had like $400 million of
We were the biggest TUFC provider.
We were probably the largest TUFC provider until we weren't.
Yep. Until we got out.
So we'll be right back. We actually have a special treat. We have the CEO of the American Association of Railroads to tell us all about how they get this data, what they do with it, and what they are seeing right now on the rails. Stay with us.
Getting reliable capacity can be complicated. Let RXO make it simple. As the third largest provider of brokered transportation in North America, RXO has the scale, resources, and expertise to help you tackle any shipping challenge. From a last-minute spot load to a managed transportation solution, from LTL to intermodal, from trained logistics experts to AI-powered freight automations, RXO has you covered from the first mile to the last mile. Start shipping on easy mode with RXO and get a smart solution to move your freight. Learn more at rxo.com/capacity. In freight, again, your customer experience is everything. Every quote, order, and status update is a chance to win or lose a customer, but that will still, again, run on manual disconnected systems. Pallet is the leading enterprise AI built for the supply chain, automating costly operations from code to cash across brokerages, carriers, forwarders, shippers, and warehouses. Mallory Alexander serves 3 times more customers per operator, deliver an exceptional customer experience at scale. Visit them right now at pallet.com.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesse Love are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara driving coach.
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
What's the masterclass all about? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're a driver, you're an owner-operator, you're a fleet owner, whether you're in compliance services, dispatcher, no matter what it is, masterclass is for you. Every 2 weeks, you're going to sit down with me, and we're going to go over certain business topics that are related specifically to your small trucking company operations. We're going to help you with everything from compliance to how to negotiate better on the spot board, how to find direct freight, and everything in between. This is the reason why you don't want to miss out on masterclass. It's about an hour to an hour and a half, and then on top of that, you'll have the library to you so that way you can always research and reflect back onto it. Don't miss out this opportunity. This is built specifically for you. I'm excited, and I hope to see you in class.
Imagine a world where your freight moves as fast as a digital pulse. What if your visibility didn't just tell you where a truck was, but exactly where it needed to be 48 hours from now? Think of a logistics network that corrects its own mistakes before they cost you a single dime. What if your supply chain could think for itself? Imagine AI agents negotiating rates in milliseconds, predictive models that solve labor shortages before they even happen. This isn't science fiction, it's the agenda. On July 15th at the historic Old Post Office in Chicago, FreightWaves presents the Supply Chain AI Symposium. We are defining in real time how AI is embedded into every mile, every warehouse, and every handshake. Because in 2026, the future isn't just coming, it's already negotiating. The FreightWaves Supply Chain AI Symposium. Secure your spot now.
Welcome back. We've still got some big topics ahead. As we said before, we have Ian Jeffries, President and CEO of the Association of American Railroads, to talk to us a little bit more about the first half of the year and what that means for railroads. And we have political analyst Ahmed Sharif Al Ameri joining us to look at the state of rail's first. Oh, nope, that's not right.
It's Hormuz.
That's not right. We're going to talk about the Strait of Hormuz as a political analyst in Iran.
Here. Ian, we love rail here. We are big fans of the
rail on the brain. Yep.
So it's rail's on the brain, but we are going to talk Hormuz in the second half of this hour because it's obviously flaring up. Ian, welcome to FreightWaves today. We're glad to have you.
Thanks for having me. Good to see both of you.
You know, I've said Wednesday is my favorite day. It's the day we get to see the truth about what's happening in the industrial side of the economy. These reports that you guys are publishing, you know, backed by a lot of other data points, is just telling us how much stronger this freight market is compared to what expectations were earlier in the year.
Yeah, I always love 9 a.m. on Wednesdays when the weekly rail traffic report comes out. Got it up right on the screen next to me here. I haven't memorized it all yet, so but no, there's a lot of green on there, which is great. And what excites me is that it's not limited to just a few categories, that it's so broad. So whether it's ag products, chemicals, even motor vehicle parts, metallic ores, minerals, et cetera, and of course intermodal. But on the carload front, you're seeing a broad-based growth, and it's showing up in the macro level numbers. I think in June, we moved the most carloads that we have moved since something like May of 2021. And if you exclude coal, it goes back to 2018. So these are really solid numbers we're seeing, and just building on, what we've seen of some positive momentum over the past few months.
Yeah, and our audience would likely remember that May of 2021 was sort of the peak of the freight market, and it was all, no pun intended, downhill from there for especially our truckers that really struggled. Intermodal is, even in the freight market, in the freight recession, intermodal stayed strong, and that's just because it offers a differentiated product. But this year it's coming on incredibly strong and picking up share. Is your sense getting from the railroads that this is related to the capacity issues that we see in trucking? Is it the fuel surcharge? What is really driving the growth of intermodal this year?
Well, just starting out with the volumes, you're exactly right. We're seeing really strong comparables, and I was listening to Bill, your prior guest, and I guess I would push back a little bit there about the weak comps. Just adding up the first half of the year, the first 6 months, we saw the most robust, the most volume in the first 6 months that we've ever seen. Make that second highest we've ever seen over the first 6 months of any year, and we moved the most intermodal we've ever moved in the month of June. So we think it's a pretty strong demand signal overall. Now, why is that happening? I mean, you certainly hit on a couple of the key issues. So we're seeing fuel price increases. We're seeing regulatory enforcement in the trucking industry on the driver front. Looking at the May PPI, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, I'm looking forward to the June PPI, but looking at year-over-year price increases, when you look at rail, the increase in moving goods by rail from May 2025 to May 2026 was about a 0.3% increase. On the trucking side, that was 17.3%. So you see the reason that rail is able to pull that traffic, but I think my members also feel that there's a natural demand signal out there more broadly than just, taking a slice of an existing pie, that maybe the pie might be growing a little. And of course, the goal is to keep that traffic now. And I think looking ahead, I was talking with one of my COOs last night, and he said he expects this trend to continue, and he expects, further capacity tightening in the trucking market. So those opportunities are going to be there. And now it's up to the railroads to really keep that service at a level that'll keep that traffic sticky on the rail.
Ian, that's actually exactly what I was going to ask. So with the increasing demand and volumes, can you tell us about how service has been the first half of the year, and then what can be expected if we continue to see the increased volumes for the second half?
Yeah, so I can tell you, not only from my words, but from the words of the chair of the Surface Transportation Board, we are in a sustained period of service that we haven't seen in many years. And so service levels are strong. They're literally rising to the demand of what traffic and what our customers need. And the key is to keep it at that level. We're at a moment of momentum here in this industry right now. When you look at safety, 2025 is the safest year in this industry's record. Lowest derailment rate, lowest employee injury rate, lowest track and equipment caused accident rates in the industry's almost 200-year history. That trend's continuing into this year. We're moving more product, and we're doing it at a high service level. And so there's kind of a trifecta of value proposition that we've got right now. The momentum's there, and we just got to take advantage of it and keep rolling forward.
What do you credit those improvements to?
So I think it's a lot of things. Craig, you mentioned kind of the coming out of the pandemic. We obviously saw that dramatic snapback on intermodal in particular, and saw a bit of a supply chain meltdown. I think there's a lot of lessons learned that came out of that, as far as making sure that you've got the reserves in line, working maybe better with your customers to understand forecasting, and really building a more resilient network around network planning, around that buffer of both power and employees to ensure you've got folks ready to go when that demand ticks up. And then just keeping, your head into grindstone there to make sure that you're doing everything the right way every single day and doing it safely. And I'll also just add, when it comes to the employee front, I'm really thrilled that as of the beginning of this week, we're finished with the collective bargaining round. We now have all 12 national contracts ratified with all of our employees. And that also creates a tailwind for the industry because our employees have certainty about pay, about healthcare, about work rules, et cetera, for the next several years. And I think that also just creates a more productive, positive environment that can contribute to all this.
And we know that the Federal Reserve looks at your data, the volume data that you guys publish. It's the second most important input into the New York Fed's models in terms of economic
activity. Only the second. What's the first?
But I think what's really interesting is that I called this earlier this year, just this robustness that you guys had in your, I believe it was your February data point, just the astounding recovery that we've seen in the industrial part of the freight market. And yet no one seemed to be talking about it. Everyone was sort of talking about this economic slowdown. The industrials, obviously, last year were really struggling from a lot of the tariff changes and policy changes that were taking place last year. But the recovery was clearly underway, but it wasn't getting enough attention that it deserved. What is the reason that people have not been paying attention, that should be paying attention to this report every single week?
So I can't tell you the reason, but I do remember earlier in the year when my policy and economics team was talking about, some of the signs of strength they were seeing, and they were putting that, commenting on that in the products they were putting out, and frankly got a bit of criticism and maybe even a little ridicule from the kind of the chattering class, but they were, proven to be right, as you mentioned, and with what we're seeing right now. And just as we all know, our traffic is certainly a leading indicator of maybe where the economy is. And I can't tell you the why, but I can tell you, you're spot on that, I think the volumes, picked up this demand signal early, and hopefully it's a sign of things to continue through the rest of the year.
Yeah, I got a lot of, we'll call it bears on X that were throwing shade at me for being bullish. And I was like, because there's been this argument in trucking circles, particularly among trucking CEOs and CFOs, that the recovery, the strength of the trucking market is all compliance related. And I believe that is a big piece of it. But I do think, and because of the fragmented nature of trucking, they often don't see the overall economy. They only see their very small piece of it. I often think, at least recently, they have been more dismissive of the volume story. And I remind them, go look at the rail data. Like it is, particularly the bulk rail data, intermodal, we all know how fungible that is between trucking, but the bulk rail data tells us a very different story. We're seeing it in ISM. The LMI that came out yesterday told us that this recovery is going to go on for some time. You guys are publishing fantastic data. I wish that the broader part of the economy would be more bullish and more confident in what we're seeing in the industrial side, because it definitely is starting to show up.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it is that breadth of year-over-year growth that we're seeing, I think, that has folks encouraged. It's not just one or two pockets. Now, certainly there are some categories that are going absolutely gangbusters. Grain, ag products are at record volumes, and we all know why. But it's not limited to that. The vast majority of different groups are green year over year. And that's great. And I think there's still more room to run, honestly. When you look at, for example, the need for additional housing starts, so construction materials, maybe this housing bill that is going to end up in law one way or another here in the next few weeks, maybe that can get that ball rolling and, really produce some demand to build more housing stock. And we're going to be the direct beneficiaries of that. The auto fleet in this country, I think, is at the oldest it's ever been. At some point, that fleet's really going to start to turn over, and maybe there's an opportunity to really move a lot of finished autos. I think there's a lot that could be done. And of course, at the macro level, rates are where they are. The Fed doesn't show any sign of ratcheting down in the near term, but at some point, hopefully, we'll see some action on that front, which could further spur things along.
Ian, it's interesting how the housing market has not been participating in this really strong, because in trucking, the flatbed market, you could take single home starts and correlate it to flatbed demand. And that connection has been disintermediated. You point out in the rail market just the fact that we're seeing such strong indicators, yet housing is not a participant. Auto isn't as participating as it could be. If we get these other two sectors of our economy really rocking, and we know how important housing is, I mean, this could be one of the greatest freight markets in history.
Here's hoping. Let's hope that it plays out like that. The opportunity's there, and we're seeing the consumers still hanging in there in a pretty decent spot. We know demand's there for housing. Like I said, the auto fleet is as old as it's ever been, so it feels like there's a lot more opportunity there. And with industrial production cranking up and manufacturing, the manufacturing index going above 50 and for a sustained period of time now, maybe we can keep that moving up a little more and get this broad-based momentum going and all be the beneficiaries of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been pretty remarkable. It's been fun to watch this every single day, what we do here at FreightWaves, but also get your reports every single week to see how the industrials, how the rails are doing, because again, it tells us a lot of truth about the overall market. I want to talk about USMCA. This is something that is we'll call it uncertain in terms of the future of it, maybe even in doubt. What is your sort of position, or what's the AAR's position on USMCA? What do you hope that the White House does with this?
Well, certainly we were big supporters of the USMCA getting across the finish line in the first place. NAFTA needed to be updated. It was updated, and we were very pleased with the outcome. We think it's been a success. Certainly, there are opportunities to improve and opportunities to refine, and I don't think anybody was terribly surprised that the administration took the path that it did to open up the review. I think we've learned that we should not get too excited, too up, too down on any given day about any trade-related or tariff-related discussions, debates, decisions, announcements coming out of the administration that, they weave and bob a decent amount. But I'm confident that we're going to end up in a good spot here. The North American trade market is so strong and so valuable and so necessary for not only the three countries, but so many different companies that operate in the North American network. And railroads would be ready to move goods in and out and through. And as long as goods are moving, we want to play an active role in that. And the safe, secure movement of goods at the borders is key, fluidity, et cetera. And we'll end up in a good spot before it's all said and done.
Ian, it's not just trade stuff. You, having covered the president and the administration for now, 10 years, you learn not to get overly excited. I was on CNBC this morning. They asked me about sort of this noise or this event over the last couple of days with the ships getting attacked, and some of the comments I think Trump had overnight about the fact that he's done with these people, he's done negotiating, he's done with this. I said, look, covering the president, you realize that this is all part of this. This is a feature, not a bug. This is how he prefers to negotiate, signal, and make everyone sort of respond to it. So you can't get overly excited on any of this stuff. That's why it's hard. It's not surprising that USMCA is being sort of shifted in where the U.S. administration has all this power in negotiating. That's sort of the playbook for this administration.
Yeah, and we'll be an active participant in the process. And again, I'm confident that we'll end up in a good spot.
So speaking of regulation, I'd like to talk about CORCA and your take on what it means for the industry if it clears Senate.
Yeah, CORCA is an absolutely critical priority for not only us, but our partners in the trucking industry and so many different retail organizations and shippers, customers alike. Chris Spears, CEO of ATA, and I have done a lot of work together, done a lot of op-eds, advocacy, and the bill passed on its own through the House with a massive bipartisan majority. Things don't move quite as easily over in the Senate, as you know, but we're excited about the opportunity to potentially attach it to the National Defense Authorization Act, one of probably the last must-pass pieces of legislation this year. And the fact that Judiciary Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, Senator Cortez Masto, and others, I think it's got 47 supporters in the Senate now. We're hopeful and cautiously optimistic that the bill will be attached to the NDAA and can get across the finish line this year, because this problem it's pervasive throughout the supply chain. Organized criminals are only getting more brazen in their tactics and putting our employees at risk, putting the supply chain at risk, increasing costs for Americans and our customers. And the federal nexus this is a key. This is interstate commerce. This is interstate crime. Locals and states don't have the capacity or the wherewithal to take this on. And that's why it's so important to really get a centrally located effort at the federal level.
Yeah, Ian, you make an interesting point. There was a great article in Trains magazine, actually it's a multi-part series, of organized criminals in Southern California jumping on trains, opening up the boxes and basically throwing out Amazon e-commerce boxes. It's just, every day, the top 2 or 3 stories we have on FreightWaves.com is some type of organized crime related activity or fraud activity that's in the millions of dollars. It's, we've all seen the American Greed show. This is definitely American Greed. It just doesn't get enough attention.
No, it doesn't. And we keep trying to do everything we can to raise awareness to it. And like I said, these are very organized, often transnational criminal networks using more and more aggressive means, heavily armed in certain situations. And it needs to be addressed at a serious level at the federal level. I was heartened on your crawl when I was watching before I came on. There was talk of some decent prosecution of a big case that just broke recently. So, there's drips and drabs of success here and there, but we really need a sustained, coordinated effort at the federal level to really make a dent and deter this from becoming even more of a problem.
Yeah, we had a fraud and cargo crime summit in Cleveland earlier this year. We had the FBI in attendance, we had the FMCSA in attendance. It was interesting because the FBI admitted, one of the big problems if you have a truckload that's gone stolen or gone missing, is just getting, as you mentioned, the local police. My brother-in-law is actually in the Greenville Spartanburg or the Spartanburg police department. He's like, look, we don't want to deal with these issues. It's not, we don't know how to deal with them.
Right.
And so local authorities don't have the resources. They consider it either a civil matter or they consider interstate matter. This isn't something they want to deal with. And anyone who's ever had a truckload go stolen knows how hard it is to get the authorities, particularly the feds, to respond to these issues.
Right. And, as you probably know, railroads, we even have our own police forces. And so we've made countless arrests of our own. I know one railroad arrested the same individual something like 17 times, but without enforcement, it doesn't matter. And these criminals know that. So that's why we need strong federal enforcement. These are federal crimes. These are interstate crimes. And we're excited about the opportunity to get some coordination going and start a serious effort to take this on.
What exactly does CORCA do for the railroads, Ian?
Yeah. So what it does is it really creates a central coordinating body across the government to not only track hotspots, but also allow for more reporting, and then working in conjunction with DOJ to target enforcement. We've also worked through separate appropriations bills, the DOJ appropriations bill to secure funds and a focus on hiring additional U.S. attorneys focused solely on this issue. And so it's kind of a multi-pronged approach, but it really starts with the feds getting good data about where this is happening so that they can target enforcement, target tracking, and then target prosecution. And so CORCA would really be the coordinating, piece of legislation that gets all this rolling.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly a coordinated effort with enforcement. Is absolutely the only way we're going to continue to make progress. What other policy issues are on your radar for the second half of the year?
So certainly, we're always focused on regulatory modernization. I mentioned this industry next year, believe it or not, is going to celebrate its 200th anniversary. And while our regulatory structure isn't quite 200 years old, most of our regulations around operations were written literally 50 years ago, so in the early 1970s, and all very manual focused. And like every other industry, we've evolved, we've developed new technologies, we've innovated, we've got better ways of doing things that result in a better safety outcome, but we're still required to do things the legacy way. And so much of our effort is about pulling the regulations that govern how we inspect things and how we operate to today's world that really relies on more technology to do what it does best, and then allowing humans to do what they do best, kind of a technology-human interface balance that will, in reality, though, result in a higher level of safety, result in a higher level of efficiency, and result in just a better running rail network. And so that's a big push, is really trying to pull the ball forward. The federal rulemaking process, the federal regulatory process is cumbersome and burdensome and glacial-like in its pace by design. And so, it is a slog every day to try to move the ball forward, but we're very focused there, letting data drive decisions. So I'm confident we're going to get a few modernization efforts across the finish line. And then, of course, when it comes to Congress, making sure that any legislation that finds its way into federal law via surface transportation reauthorization, doesn't look like that's going to happen this year, but whenever it does, making sure that, all modes are kind of treated equally when it comes to innovation and technology, and that you don't end up in an overly burdensome situation that doesn't allow you to innovate.
So, Ian, we have talked a lot about all of the positive things that are going on with the railroads, and then some legislation as well. Big picture for our viewers, what's the one thing you want them to remember from this segment about the first half of 2026 regarding freight and the rail?
As we close out the first half and head into the second half, this industry has nothing but momentum. We're operating at the safest level we ever have. We're operating at a high level of service. We're investing billions of our own dollars back into our network so that taxpayers don't have to. And the result of that is an increase in volumes, which is hopefully a reflection of an ever strengthening economy that we look forward to supporting into the second half of this year.
Well, Ian, congratulations to your members, to the industry, keeping the economy moving. There's nothing more important than the railroads as the backbone of the industrial economy. We're big fans here at FreightWaves Today. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back. We're going to talk about Hormuz, Iran, the story that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
So we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Race car drivers like NASCAR champion Jesse Love are a lot like commercial drivers, pros. But even the best in the world still watch the tape to see what they missed and get better next time. So we created the Samsara driving coach.
Great race, Jesse, but you were following too closely and you were speeding.
Okay, you got me on that one.
Samsara uses insights from millions of professional drivers to coach drivers in real time.
Because even champions need a coach.
Give me the keys.
The super successful people are part of the 1%. They're part of that very, very small percentage. That's why I don't want you to do things that everybody's doing. I want you to do the small things that nobody else is doing. The people that are most successful in this business treat it like it's the only thing that's bringing income into their household. If you do that, then you'll have the same results. These people operate like they have no other chance. They have nothing else going. This is the only breadwinner that they have in play. I'm Adam Wingfield, and this is the FreightWaves Playbook. Become part of the 1%. Sign up for FreightWaves Playbook today.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. Julie, I'm a trucker. I love trucks. I've got diesel in my blood, but I love talking railroads.
Me too.
You know, when we had the opportunity to buy Trains magazine and I got into the rail, I started doing a lot about reading about rail history. There was so much about American history that is tied to the railroads and the expansion of the railroads. It's just such a fascinating story that doesn't get enough love. I mean, American railroads get a bad rep because passenger rail. Americans view railroads and they just don't
understand. Not much passenger rail, but I mean,
well, they don't understand. Every country around the world is jealous of our freight railroads.
Yeah.
Because that is what keeps the industrial sector, and they do such an amazing job. And they get a lot of flack from our trucker friends, but they are really the backbone of the U.S. economy. And I think I love having, I love Wednesdays. It's the Rail Wednesday.
Yeah, me too.
Up next, speaking of just chaos in the world, there's no better person to tell us what's happening in the Middle East with Hormuz. We have Ahmed Sharif Al Ameri. He is a Emirati author. He's an analyst, and he's going to tell us all about what's going on in Hormuz. Welcome to FreightWaves Today. How are you, Ahmed?
I'm doing great. It's such a pleasure to be on Freight, really, and hopefully we give the audience what they want to hear.
Well, let's talk about the weekend. The last couple of days has been this flare-up that's happened. Donald Trump has basically said he's given up negotiation, but we all know, covering Trump for years, that you never really know where you stand with Donald Trump. He says kind of what is on his mind at the moment, but eventually we get to where we'll eventually be. What is your read on things in the Middle East right now?
Of course, I always begin with saying that our region is very unstable. So there is some sort of why for Donald Trump on why would you have a ceasefire to begin with? But at the same time, I can't fully put the blame on him because it's a very unstable region. We've been saying this for years, and people have been seeing this already. It's from ceasefire to back to firing again. And, I'd like to also throw emphasis on not just that it's an unstable region, it is filled and infiltrated with, terrorists like the Iranian regime. So at the same time, it's, you can tell that it's been on and off with Donald Trump. But from a UAE standpoint, we have always made sure that we make sure that our sovereignty is never tested, our safety and our sovereignty is never tested. So we hope for the best, especially now that there's no ceasefire. We just hope that's going to be a historic week, hopefully.
So, Ahmed, there's been a big shift over the last decade in Middle Eastern relations, sort of a reconfiguration of the region, how it looks at alignment with the United States and Western economies. Particularly your country has shifted, it seems like, significantly over the last couple of decades. What does that mean for American viewers that are watching this? How should they be thinking about the current sort of orientation in the Middle East in terms of who are the parties and how are they sort of thinking about alignment?
In regards to UAE standpoint, in my opinion, the UAE has always been pro-peace, pro-UAE, pro-development. We have never created chaos in the region. We have always made sure that everything is done in a very peaceful manner, especially for, in relation to the Strait of Hormuz. So we're going to talk about that today. We are a producer, right? And it is a primary artery to reach global markets. The UAE has always been a standout developmental state. We have always been preparing for times like these. It's like a very vulnerable time, but we've done it through long-term planning. We have different pipelines that work. We've always been a visionary state. In regards to other states within the region, of course, they also have the same idea of themselves that they're visionary. But the UAE has always been standing out as being visionary and the key holder to becoming a hotspot for development and peace in the very unstable region that we have.
Yeah, what was driving the decision to leave OPEC? I mean, it was obviously something that has been a part of the UAE. You guys have been members, I believe, one of the founding members of OPEC. You've shifted out of OPEC. What was really the driving principle behind that decision?
It's mainly we want to have the freedom of our own production, right? We don't want to have someone else control our production or have some sort of authority or control. We chose to leave because we want to be pro UAE. We want to make sure that it's mainly beneficial for the UAE, and not just that. We felt like OPEC was more of dragging us down rather than pushing us up. So, in my opinion, we decided to leave due to that mainly. There's also some minor factors, but it's mainly that it's our produce, it's our production. We want to make sure that we benefit as much as possible from that, without being dragged down through OPEC. And OPEC Plus as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I lost audio.
You lost audio?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Julie's having some microphone issues. So Ahmed, the sort of state of affairs in Hormuz, is this going to be, are we going to see permanent tolling? Is that going to be a reality? Is this going to require, the United States or perhaps European allies to police the waters? What's your read on this right now?
Of course, there's different reactions to all of this, right? I'll call it a disruption. It's been a disruption to the whole maritime. But again, we all know that because the maritime doesn't stay regional, it immediately ripples into global shipping, energy markets, and supply chains. Because so much of the world's energy has to pass through this single narrow passage. And back to the UAE, the UAE is one of the most reliable suppliers in the Gulf, and we feel this directly, but so does every importer in Asia and beyond. This is why the UAE has pursued such aggressive economic diversification. And through securing that, of course, every country has its benefits. Like, for example, let's say the US wants to police and secure the maritime. It's also, they have a lot of benefits through doing that. But then again, I like to throw emphasis as much as possible, and I'll be repeating this through and through. It's a very unstable region, especially the Strait. It's a strategic choke point in this region. It's one of if not the main most vital maritime choke points in the world. So I wouldn't be surprised if the US wants to be involved in policing the Strait. But at the same time, there are so many other players that want to be involved in the Strait of Hormuz story.
Yeah, you guys have been doing something awesome, which is like, look, we're just going to bypass this thing. Like, you're building this east-west pipeline. You fast-tracked it. Tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
So, creating different pipelines is also not just about bypassing. It's also about the diversification that we want to have. Having only one card to use or play is a high risk and sometimes a very low reward. Having diversification and different pipelines is a high risk with much higher rewards. And there is going to be some reactions to that, but then again, we have seen a lot of things move sharply, whether it was oil prices, whether it was different products within different pipelines. We've seen it all. But then again, we want to make sure that, again, with going back to the whole visionary term, the UAE sees something that after a couple of years, you'll see other states in the region following. You'll see other states in the region following that, trying to have more pipeline, trying to have more diversification. But the UAE does it now to also secure later. It's all about sustainability in the end. It's about sustaining and developing afterwards.
So when you are weighing these alternative options and talking about the risk versus that, how do you weigh the cost?
Sorry, I didn't really hear the...
No, she was asking, again, I don't know if her mic is having problems, but talking about these are huge projects that take a lot of capital. How do you guys allocate capital? How are you thinking about capital allocation in terms of these big infrastructure projects?
Yeah. So in regards to them, during the war, it has been a lot of delays, right? In regards to all of these, costs and having these projects and trying to make them happen. And, I would like to also focus on these delays and those downstream costs, because the delays, they don't just affect the ship owners, they also raise costs all the way down to business and consumers through higher freight, fuel, and inventory expenses. So, a UAE standpoint, for an economy like the UAE, this has been deeply connected to global trade, and these arteries, there's different arteries, of course, they're not optional. It's foundational because we have a target, right? A growth target, which is Vision 2031. And AI is also involved. We also have AI-driven logistics platforms that are already helping companies stimulate delay scenarios and optimize these decisions for them. And the data from these tools consistently show that while alternatives exist, the added time and cost are substantial. So whether it was delays, whether it was costs, whether it was projects that we're trying to create and have, it won't be much of an issue because we have, again, the diversity of management.
So Ahmed, as we see UAE and your neighbors and partners in the Middle East try to route freight and help companies route around the Hormuz bottleneck, it feels like the maximum, this is Iran, sort of the maximum power they have right now over time, that power is going to be quite diluted once they lose their sort of stranglehold on that bottleneck.
Indeed, it's more of a loss to them than it's a loss to us, and it's also going to have a lot of pressure. There's also something called the inflationary pressure. I'd like to talk about as well, because it's my main idea, especially recently. Trump also made my life easier. He also mentioned that there's no ceasefire. So there is also an inflationary pressure worldwide. There's higher energy prices, disruptions, and they will raise the costs of everything everywhere. And there's also the UAE's own experience as both a major exporter and a diversified economy, and that shows how important stable energy flows are to keeping global price pressures contained. But at the same time, there is also the freedom of navigation. There is through the Strait of Hormuz, because it's essential for global economic stability. Because in the end, the UAE has consistently emphasized this under the international law. And in regards to the Iranian regime, they have been closing and opening the strait as if it was their own strait. But then again, due to different players, different states acting immediately onto that, we have realized that they were holding the strait hostage, and that's what the terrorists will do. And that's why we are hoping that during this coming days, President Donald Trump would do something about it and make sure that this time, when they have their dinner on a plate, they finish their food this time and not just have 2 bites and leave it.
Yeah, it has been interesting to watch. I mean, high oil prices are not necessarily bad things for exporting countries, so you get the benefit of high oil. But then that money, that capital that you guys have in higher oil prices, you're investing in new infrastructure, which will lower the, ultimately make the flow of goods and lower the price of oil over time because this infrastructure is there, but it gives you guys a lot more power over your controlling the flow of cargo.
Indeed, and that's also due to our different smart paths. We have our main smart path is diplomacy. People think it's usually through different paths other than sitting on a table and dealing with things. But our main strategy, in my opinion, is diplomacy through de-escalation, and that was how we made sure that we, in a very fast way, restored the market confidence. We saw signs of this in recent weeks, of course, when traffic began recovering after talks advanced. And the UAE has been clear in calling for full implementation of agreements and a return to stable navigation. And throughout that, this pragmatic, rule-based approach is central to how the UAE operates as a developmental state, which focuses on long-term stability that benefits both the vision goals and the broader global economy.
Yeah, it's interesting sitting as an observer in the United States has now become an oil exporting country, how aligned our interest is with our Middle Eastern partners, because now we're all benefiting from, the free flow of energy. And what's interesting over the last decade is just how important energy has played. It's always played an important in the global economy, but countries like the United States that have invested in energy infrastructure, places like China that continue to invest in energy infrastructure, had done quite well, whereas countries like in Europe, where they've de-emphasized their own energy security and energy infrastructure, have paid a dear price. It's really fascinating to watch. And really, frankly, unfortunate, I think, for the Germans and folks in Europe that they have put themselves to be so vulnerable to these disruptions, because they simply have took it for granted that there was always going to be a stability and free flow of energy. They apparently didn't study history very well.
It's as you said, stability. It's a path to stabilization, because a durable reduction in tensions would let shipping costs, energy prices, and business confidence gradually return to more normal levels. And, markets respond well to credible, sustained stability, because that's the UAE's own trajectory. From a major energy exporter to a developmental state investing heavily in AI, renewables, and future industries, sometimes these European states feel like they have the fear of missing out, and they're not willing to, take that step, take that risk, if you would. We've seen Donald Trump, whether you agree or disagree with some of his politics, he's a very courageous president. He likes to take high risks, and so far we've seen high risks led to very high rewards, except for, of course, having a sit down with terrorists. Other than that, Donald Trump has been doing a great job. And that's of course due to him having a path to stabilization. And some European countries are just sitting in the stands, just watching and spectating. And some of them you don't blame, because they don't have the full capability. But some of them, they have all of the advantages, but they choose to just sit down and watch everything unfold in front of them. And maybe then they would start to choose sides, maybe choose the winning side in the end.
Yeah, it's watching it, it's kind of insane from where I stand, because it's like, the United States receives very little of its energy from the Middle East, from this region. Yet we have been the world's, have kept sea lanes open and are expected to show up and protect Hormuz from disruptions. Yet we're not the primary beneficiaries of it. The Europeans are. And yet, and you could argue that the Chinese are as well. Yet it's American hard military power that's over there. I will say, from really want to thank you guys, you're getting the brunt of the attacks. Your cities are at risk due to what's happening in Iran, but you guys you're not flinching at all. And I think that's pretty remarkable to watch, just how brave your people are to stand in the line of fire and realize that this is important and something that we need to do.
I mean, definitely. In the end, we've seen through years that the UAE will never be scared of cowardly terrorists like the Iranian regime. And if they think that everything that they've done is just gonna go past like nothing happened, then they haven't totally misunderstood. We have a lot of allies in the USA. Thankfully, is also one of our major allies, and they also have, some of their bases in the Gulf, and of course they wouldn't let their people also have to go through that risk and through that danger. And from the UAE standpoint, every single person living in the UAE is considered part of the family, and no one should be afraid in the UAE, because that's how we do our sovereignty. If you're in our country, whether you're visiting or an expat or a local, you are part of the sovereignty. You are an important person in this country. You are part of the family, part of our circle. So nothing should bring you any harm. And it's remarkable. I'm from the UAE, and I think it's very remarkable, because this has been instilled. It's part of my nature. It wasn't nurtured into me after I grew up. I was born to understand that everyone here is part of our success. We are not just a bunch of people that want to succeed alone and people are going to help us. No, we are all succeeding in this world. We're all in this together. In regards to the USA, we've been allies since the beginning. Nothing is going to change in regards to that. It's just we might have some agreements, some disagreements, which is normal for allies. It's not a very superficial or like an artificial alliance that we have. It's a very real alliance that we have. We always sit down and speak before anything happens. Due to that, of course, the UAE would condemn anything against the USA and vice versa.
Ahmed, let's wrap with this quickly. What's your outlook for the region over the coming weeks?
Well, in my opinion, I think this region is going to see history unfold, hopefully, in the coming weeks, in the coming period of time. Hopefully, it's going to be history unfolding in the humanity's favor, not in the terrorists' favor. And hopefully, I also see that the USA is going to be also writing their history books.
Yeah, it's a story. It's obviously is captivated the world. Everyone's wondering, where is this going to end up? What's going to do it? What I'm so reassured by, Julie, is just how much investment, infrastructure, and resources that not only the UAE, but certainly the UAE, but the other countries are like, look, we're not going to be held hostage. We've sort of ripped the Band-Aid off. We're going to do what we need to do to protect sea lanes. And look, our sovereignty is not going to be disrupted by these bad actors who are trying to, as Ahmad describes them, terrorists, that are trying to disrupt, not only the flow of cargo, but also put people's lives at risk, civilian lives at risk, which they've certainly been doing. Ahmad, I got to ask, when do we get to come over and do FreightWaves today from the UAE? I got to spend time in Dubai. It's a fascinating place. Abu Dhabi is one of my favorite places. I got to go to the Ferrari world and ride the fastest roller coaster in, I think at the time in the world. I don't know if it's still the case, but a really remarkable place. We've lost audio, Ahmad. Sorry, I've lost audio. I don't know what's happened. There's audio issues here today.
Well,
Ahmad, thanks for coming and joining us. Have you ever been to the Middle East?
No.
It's a remarkable place. I mean, these cities are just built out of, like, if you go back and look at the pictures from the 1960s, they're literally just desert, and they've come out to be some of the most modern cities in the world. And just the level of infrastructure, and it tells you that, the American global ingenuity, the idea that you can build things out of a desert, which, Mother Nature definitely did not set it up for success, except providing oil and energy supplies that is now being used to really build these fascinating cities of the future. It's a remarkable place. We've got to go there at some point. Julie.
Sure.
We should definitely go there and shoot FreightWaves today and feature all of the logistics infrastructure that's taking place across that part of the world. And look, there's no really more central place in the movement of cargo and people than the Middle East. That's why these airports are so massive. They build these airports and these become global hubs for these fascinating airlines because they can move so many people and cargo around the world. It's just a remarkable part of the world and frankly, plays such an important role in global trade.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, look, we had a great show today. Julie, I love having the rail day. I do. It's one of my favorite days. And I think there's just so many great things to talk about in the freight world. And we're here every single day at noon to 2 to talk to you, our audience, about what's happening in real time.
That's right. And we have a great show coming up tomorrow. And please also continue to interact with us on social media, #FW Today. But tomorrow on FreightWaves Today.
God, we have more rail stuff. Intermodal. We're at the intersection.
Yes, we have Ann Rinke, the president and CEO of IANA tomorrow, and Chris Wofford, the founder and managing partner of Wofford Advisors. So it'll be great. The second half to again, talk about the state of intermodal freight, right? And then we have the second half of the show. We get to dig into freight dynamics a little bit more with Zach Strickland and Zach Rogers and break down the LMI.
I am curious what Ann has to say about coming from the TIA and trucking and brokerage and going over to another intermediary, which is IANA, what that's like and what the different perceptions are and different views of regulation and sort of what's going on there. So that will be tomorrow at noon. Join us every day here at FreightWaves Today. Have a great day.
Post Office in Chicago, FreightWaves presents the Supply Chain AI Symposium. We are defining in real time how AI is embedded into every mile, every warehouse, and every handshake. Because in 2026, the future isn't just coming, it's already negotiating. The FreightWaves Supply Chain